The morning of February 22, 2026, changed the map of organized crime in the Western Hemisphere. According to public reporting from Reuters and the Associated Press, Mexican security forces engaged a heavily armed convoy near the mountainous terrain of Topalpa, Jalisco. The target was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known to the world as El Mencho, the leader of one of the most powerful criminal organizations ever documented. Officials said he was wounded attempting to flee through dense forest cover and died during emergency transport. His death carried a $15 million United States bounty. But the real story did not end in those hills. It began there, because within 6 hours of confirmation, the highways of Mexico became a war zone. Reuters documented 85 coordinated roadblocks across multiple states, vehicles burning, commerce frozen, and a death toll that would climb to at least 62 people, including 25 members of Mexico's National Guard. This was not grief. This was a statement. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel was telling the world that removing their leader would cost everyone. Now we go to the sequence that made contact possible. According to the Associated Press, the trail began on Friday, February 20th. Investigators had been tracking a trusted associate connected to a female companion. That single thread pulled them toward Topalpa, a region defined by elevation, dense tree cover, and roads that twist through terrain designed by nature to slow pursuit. This is not coincidence. Leaders like El Mencho choose geography the way generals choose fortresses. If the land can add 15 minutes to a response time, that is 15 minutes to disappear. By Sunday morning, officials said the operation had entered its final phase. 6 helicopters, ground cordons, air support cutting off escape vectors before dawn could shift the visibility advantage. That level of coordination tells you this was not a patrol that stumbled into contact. This was a calculated strike with assets positioned to close every exit. Then the firefight. Public reporting described heavy weapons present on both sides. The Associated Press noted rocket launchers among the seized equipment. That is not a defensive posture. That is a military footprint. Authorities said the exchange was intense and pushed the target and his guards into the undergrowth, a phrase that tells you the final moments were not a clean capture in a doorway. They were a hunt measured in meters, not blocks. Officials said El Mencho was hit during the exchange. He was moving with 2 bodyguards, both also critically wounded, and then the words that would ignite a nation. Died en route. 3 words, a complete transformation of the political landscape. To understand why those 3 words triggered what came next, you have to understand how a cartel interprets a moment like this. A cartel is not a single person. It is infrastructure. It is routes that move product north. It is payroll that keeps 10,000 people loyal. It is fear that keeps 100,000 people silent. When leadership is struck, the organization does not collapse. It tests itself. It asks one question in real time. Can we still coordinate? Can we still impose cost? Can we still make cooperation with the state feel more dangerous than cooperation with us? The retaliation was designed to answer that question publicly. According to Reuters, 85 roadblocks appeared within hours. That number is not random. That number represents synchronized action across multiple operational zones. Not one crew acting emotionally. A network proving it can still function under pressure. Roadblocks are not only disruption, they are communication. They tell civilians you are not protected. They tell local officials you cannot secure everything at once. They tell rivals we are still here, we are still organized, we are still dangerous. And then the casualty count that transforms a security incident into a national crisis. Reuters reported at least 62 dead in the aftermath, 25 National Guard members, dozens of suspected cartel gunmen. At least 1 bystander caught in the crossfire. Those numbers do not fade from public memory. Those numbers force political decisions, they force statements, they force deployments, and they force the question that no government wants to answer out loud. What did this actually achieve? Now look at the state response. According to public reporting, authorities conducted at least 70 arrests in follow-on operations. Reinforcements surged into affected areas. Roads were cleared. Burned vehicles were removed. The visible signs of chaos were scrubbed from the landscape as fast as logistics would allow. But clearing a highway is not the same as clearing a network. And that difference is where the real story lives. Because two clocks start the moment a cartel leader falls. Clock 1 is public order. Can the state keep roads open? Can commerce resume? Can schools function? Can the government project enough stability to prevent panic from becoming its own crisis? Clock 2 is internal. Who controls the money? Who controls the weapons? Who controls the corridors that generate revenue? If the internal clock runs faster than the public order clock, the country does not get peace. It gets competition. That is the mechanism you have to watch, not the headline, the handoff. A modern cartel operates in layers. Layer 1 is the field layer, the gunmen, the scouts, the enforcers. They are visible. They are replaceable. They are the faces you see on camera. Layer 2 is the managerial layer, the coordinators who manage safe houses, vehicles, fuel, communications, and timing. They do not need to win firefights. They need to keep movement possible. Layer 3 is the financial layer. The accountants, the money brokers, the people who keep payroll flowing and keep internal disputes from becoming open war. When leadership is removed, those layers either align behind a successor quickly or they fracture. If they align, violence can actually decrease because orders become disciplined again. The machine keeps running, just under a different face. If they fracture, every mid-level commander has an incentive to prove dominance fast. That means more extortion, more kidnappings, more reckless actions that invite harder responses. Fragmentation is often more dangerous for ordinary people than consolidation. That is the paradox authorities have to navigate. And this is where the retaliation itself becomes a kind of internal election. 85 coordinated roadblocks is not mourning. It is proof of life. It is proof of command. It is a message to everyone inside the organization. We can still mobilize fear on demand, which means we can still lead. The retaliation was not only aimed at the state, it was aimed at every faction inside the cartel that might have been considering a power grab. Now we have to talk about the detail that most viewers will miss because it is not dramatic, it is structural. The Associated Press reported that authorities seized heavy weapons, including rocket launchers. That is capability. That is a signal that has been building for years. Cartels in Mexico have moved beyond the profile of street criminals. They operate with equipment, training, and logistics that blur the line between organized crime and insurgency. That is why moments like this do not stay inside Mexico. El Mencho carried a $15 million United States reward. Washington has spent years describing the Jalisco New Generation Cartel as one of the most dangerous transnational criminal organizations affecting American communities. Fentanyl, methamphetamine, human trafficking. The supply chains run north, and the consequences land in emergency rooms from Ohio to Oregon. When a cartel leader dies and retaliation erupts at this scale, pressure rises on both governments. The United States wants momentum and visible results. Mexico must demonstrate control without appearing to surrender sovereignty to foreign pressure. Meanwhile, rivals inside the criminal ecosystem watch every hesitation. If the Jalisco New Generation Cartel looks distracted, other organizations will move. They will probe corridors. They will recruit defectors. They will trigger conflicts that spill into new territory. This is how a succession war begins without anyone announcing it. And it is why the days after Topalpa matter more than the moment of contact. Because a state can clear a roadblock in an afternoon. It cannot clear a pipeline unless it knows where the pipes are buried. After a strike like this, the surviving organization hunts for leaks. It tightens internal security. It changes routes, phones, safe houses, and communication protocols. It treats the strike as a lesson, and that makes the follow-up window short. If authorities want lasting impact, they have to hit the second layer quickly. transport coordinators, payroll managers, weapons brokers, trusted drivers, the people who do not give interviews but who make movement possible. When those nodes are removed, the cartel still exists, but it becomes slower, louder, and easier to track. This is where governments often misread the scoreboard. A convoy clearing burned vehicles is not victory. A surge of troops is not solution. The real metric is whether the network loses the ability to coordinate. When you see disorganized retaliation, inconsistent tactics, and a collapse in messaging discipline, that is when a network is actually weakened. But when retaliation stays coordinated even after a leadership hit, it suggests a new command structure is already functioning. That is the signal you should be watching. Now, we bring in the civilian dimension because that is where fear becomes measurable. As roadblocks spread and vehicles burned, travel warnings began circulating. Business Insider reported tourists in affected regions were advised to shelter in place. That phrase transforms a destination into a crisis zone in a single sentence. That is exactly the kind of disruption a cartel wants. Not only to punish the state, but to punish the economy. Because economic pressure becomes political pressure. And once political pressure rises, incentives shift. Local officials want calm. National leaders want credibility. Security forces want authority. And cartels want leverage. So what comes next depends on whether authorities use this window to dismantle the infrastructure behind the violence, or whether the infrastructure survives and simply finds a new face to represent it. This is where expert framing matters. CBS News, examining the aftermath, described the future as uncertain and warned about the dynamics that follow leadership strikes. One phrase captures the risk clearly. A power vacuum is created that opens the door to violent realignments. That is not speculation for effect. It is a description of how systems behave when control is contested. Now here is the part most viewers will miss unless you know what to look for. The succession decision does not happen in a single room with a formal vote. It happens through signals, through payments, through violence, through silence. After a leader falls, three groups determine the future. Security chiefs who control the gunmen and the perimeter. They decide who can move without being targeted. Corridor managers who control routes, vehicles, and paid checkpoints. They decide which supply lines stay active. And financiers who keep payroll flowing and disputes from exploding into open war. Without them, no one can purchase loyalty for long. If those groups align behind one successor, you get discipline. If they split, violence becomes currency used to settle internal arguments. And that brings us to legitimacy. A cartel survives because people believe it will exist tomorrow. That belief is built through routine. Payments arrive on time. Routes reopen predictably. Punishment comes for those who cooperate with authorities. When a leader dies, routine is threatened. The organization has to prove it can still deliver. If you see a quick return to predictable patterns, that suggests consolidation. If you see scattered flare-ups in disconnected locations, that suggests fragmentation. Either outcome carries danger, but one is easier to fight. A consolidated structure has hierarchy and patterns that can be mapped. A fragmented structure creates more violence in more places because there is no central authority to restrain the impulse to prove power. So the state faces a paradox. Weakening the top can create chaos at the bottom unless authorities also dismantle the managers and financiers who keep violence organized. That is why the smart approach is sustained pressure on the pipeline while keeping daily life as stable as possible. Target communications. Target logistics. Target cash movement, without creating a vacuum that civilians pay for. So what should you watch in the coming weeks? First, watch for successor indicators, not rumors. A sudden drop in roadblocks, a shift in where violence concentrates, a change from spectacular disruption to quiet control, targeted internal killings that signal a succession has been decided. Second, watch for financial pressure, freezes, seizures, arrests of accountants and transport coordinators. When authorities start hitting money and managers, that is not routine enforcement. That is an attempt to prevent the machine from rebuilding under new leadership. Third, watch daily life metrics: roads staying open, schools operating, commerce flowing. Because that is the real scoreboard. And now the question that makes this moment genuinely dangerous. If a successor consolidates quickly, violence may quiet down on camera, but the machine may keep moving product north under a new face. If no successor consolidates, violence may spread wider, but the machine may weaken as internal fighting burns resources and exposes networks to penetration. One outcome is quieter, one outcome is louder. Both carry risk. So the question is not whether El Mencho is gone. The question is whether the system that outlived him will be forced into a fight it cannot control. Which future do you believe is coming? Consolidation under disciplined new leadership, or fragmentation that turns the next 60 days into open succession warfare? Tell me which outcome you expect and what signal you are watching for.